Star Trek, Primitive Passenger Season 1, Episode 10, A Human Encounter. Nolan Mercer stood at the view screen, his face a mask of grim determination as he surveyed the ruined landscape below. The planet's surface was a patchwork of destruction, entire continents pockmarked with impact craters, its atmosphere choked with swirling clouds of dust and debris. Life signs detected, Elara's voice broke the somber silence. Faint, but present, approximately 40 individuals. Nolan nodded, his jaw set. "Beam me down," he commanded, his voice tight with resolve. The familiar shimmer of the transporter enveloped him, tingling across his skin as the sterile environment of the ship dissolved around him. In an instant, Nolan found himself standing amidst the ruins of what must have once been a thriving city. The scene before him was hauntingly familiar, mirroring the last 5 planets he'd visited. Anything of value had been stripped away, leaving behind only desolation and despair. The air was acrid, filled with the stench of decay and destruction. Nolan's nostrils flared as he tried to filter out the worst of it, his eyes watering slightly from the irritant still lingering in the atmosphere. He made his way through the rubble, his boots crunching on pulverized debris, scanner in hand as he followed the weak life signs. He found them huddled in the remains of a subterranean shelter. The survivors were a pitiful sight, their gaunt figures and alien features drawn with hunger and fear. Their eyes, wide and wary, followed Nolan's every move as he approached. "Hello, can you understand me? Is everyone okay?" Nolan called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He held his hands up, palms out, in a universal gesture of peace. As Nolan approached, one of them, a tall, willowy creature with iridescent skin, stepped forward. Its movements were graceful despite its emaciated state, reminding Nolan of a tree bending in the wind. "Please," the alien's voice was barely above a whisper, a raspy sound that seemed to scrape against Nolan's ears. "Are you here to help us?" Nolan nodded, swallowing hard against the lump in his throat. "I can." What happened here? The alien's large, multifaceted eyes clouded with sorrow. "The board came. We were unprepared. Those of us here are all that remain, as far as we know." Another survivor, a squat, broad reptilian being, pushed its way past the others. Its scales were dull and flaking, a testament to the harsh conditions they'd endured. "You have ship," it exclaimed, its voice a guttural growl tinged with desperation. "You help us. We starve, one by one." The creature's clawed hand shot out, gripping Nolan's arm with surprising strength. "There are others, other survivors, on Vexora Prime. It's a sanctuary world. We've heard transmissions over our transceiver," said the thin creature, "and they are helping refugees throughout the sector. Please, can you take us there?" The aliens began to crowd around Mercer, eyes wild with a mix of hope and fear. "Please, we're dying here." Nolan's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching as he let out a long, controlled breath. The weight of their desperation pressed down on him, a familiar burden he'd carried across countless light years. After a moment's hesitation, he tapped his comm badge. "Elara, prepare for multiple refugees. We'll need quarters for all 40, food and water." He looked over the crowd of hopeful alien eyes. They have children with them, too. The Lost streaked through space at warp, its life support systems laboring under the strain of accommodating far more passengers than they were designed for. The constant, subtle vibration beneath Nolan's feet spoke of overtaxed power conduits and environmental controls pushed to their limits. The air felt thick and stale, a constant reminder of the unexpected burden the ship now carried. Nolan Mercer stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the starfield ahead, trying to ignore the muffled sounds of his unexpected guests filtering through the ship's corridors. Over the next 3 days, the ship became a floating refugee camp. Elara's ingenious use of cargo bays and rarely used corridors as makeshift living quarters kept the Lost functional, if not comfortable. The replicators worked overtime, their hum a constant background noise as they produced bland but nourishing rations and recycled water at a furious pace. The ship's limited medical facilities were stretched to their limits, with Elara herself diagnosing and dispensing treatment from the medical replicators, her voice a constant presence throughout the ship. Nolan found himself seeking solitude in the unlikeliest of places. His own quarters, now shared with the willowy, iridescent alien and the squat reptilian who had first pleaded for his help. Their names, he learned, were Zinra and Klex. The contrast between their alien forms and the utilitarian human design of his quarters was a stark reminder of the strange journey that had led him to this moment. "Your ship," Zinra marveled on the second evening, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the stars outside the viewport like a living kaleidoscope. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen." Klex, ever practical, was more concerned with their destination. "Vexora Prime," he rumbled, his scales shifting anxiously with a soft rasping sound. "We go? Vexora Prime ready?" "Everything I know about Vexora Prime I learned from you, Mr. Klex," Nolan replied, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. His response was cut short by Elara's voice over the comm. "Nolan, we have a situation in Cargo Bay 2. Medical emergency." As he hurried out, Nolan realized that for the first time in decades, the Lost felt alive. Chaotic and crowded, but undeniably alive. The irony wasn't lost on him. In his quest to reconnect with humanity, he found himself surrounded by anything but. Yet somehow, it felt right. The pulse of life aboard his ship, alien though it might be, was a welcome change from the cold silence of space. Days later, the Lost dropped out of warp in orbit around Vexora Prime. The planet was a stark contrast to the world they'd left behind, a vibrant blue-green orb teeming with life, its surface a patchwork of lush continents and sparkling oceans. "I'm detecting a large refugee settlement on the southern continent," Elara reported. "Heavily populated, mixed species." Nolan turned to the group of survivors he'd rescued, his expression a mix of relief and something akin to regret. "This is where we part ways. I'll beam down with you. Make sure you're safe." The transporter beam deposited them in a bustling receiving center. Nolan found himself swept up in a sea of displaced beings from 100 different worlds. The air was thick with a cacophony of alien languages and the acrid smell of too many bodies packed into too small a space. Harried-looking officials moved through the crowd, their voices raised as they tried to process the seemingly endless stream of new arrivals. "Name?" a tired voice asked. Nolan looked up to see a bored Tellarite official, his porcine features creased with exhaustion. "Damien Townsend," he replied, deciding on the spot that honesty wasn't always the best policy in a place like this. The Tellarite grunted, not bothering to look up from his pad. "Feces. Human," Nolan said, bracing for a reaction that didn't come. "Here." The official shoved a bundle into Nolan's arms, the fabric rough against his skin. "Clothes. Ration chips for 2 days. Next." "Wait," Nolan interjected, his voice rising above the din. "I'm human. Have you seen my kind before? Are there others like me here?" The Tellarite's small eyes narrowed, a flash of irritation crossing his features. He glared at Nolan. "Next." Nolan found himself unceremoniously pushed out into a crowded street, the gates of the receiving center clanging shut behind him with a finality that sent a shiver down his spine. He stood there for a moment, taking in the cacophony of alien voices, the makeshift shelters cobbled together from scavenged materials, and the palpable desperation hanging in the air. The desperation had a smell, Nolan realized with a grimace. It was a potent mixture of smoke, feces, and body odor that assaulted his nostrils, making his eyes water. Nolan Mercer felt truly small, just another face in a crowd of the displaced and forgotten. As he clutched his meager rations, he looked at the broken souls around him. Each seemed like a reflection of himself alone on the Strouch all those years ago. They existed in that liminal space between abject desperation and a drive to keep moving forward, simply because they were still alive. Nolan navigated through a chaotic stream of refugees, each person seeming lost and uncertain of their direction. The streets were filled with a desperate energy, as individuals barter frantically, offering drugs, food, trinkets, and gadgets to the new arrivals in exchange for their ration chips. Among them, a particularly filthy and desperate alien offered his wife for ration chips. The dire circumstances and the lengths to which people would go to survive in this desperate environment seemed unlimited. Tapping the comm badge he'd kept tucked in his pocket, Nolan spoke quietly, his voice barely audible above the din of the refugee camp. "Elara, you got me?" "I'm here, Nolan. I'm monitoring your progress through the city." "Any luck?" she responded, her familiar voice a comforting presence in his ear. "It's hell on here." "Hell on Vexora," he corrected himself, his voice tight with frustration. "It's hardly better here than the last planet we were on. Only here you have to fight, beg, and steal to eat." His eyes scanned the crowded street, taking in the dizzying array of alien forms moving around him. "Are you able to break down life signs and see if there are other humans?" "Not with the sensors on the Lost," Elara replied, a note of regret in her voice. "She just isn't built for it. I would blink back and bring the havoc, but we're running on fumes up here," she explained, her tone becoming more matter-of-fact. "Having so many people aboard wiped our power banks, and we're low on dilithium to power the reactor." "I'll make my way here, no worries," Nolan said, his voice carrying a forced lightness that belied the tension in his shoulders. He took the ration chip from his hip pocket, turning it over in his fingers as an idea formed. "Would you be able to make 30 or so more of these? It's basically local currency. If I have more, I can use them to buy information. That gives you time to hop around locally and gather needed materials and supplies to get the Lost back up to full power." "I've found everything we need," Elara responded, her voice tinged with hesitation. "I just don't know if I have anything to barter with." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her tone was lower. "I may need to get creative if you're willing." The implication of outright theft hung unspoken between them. "Let me work on the chips, Nolan," Elara continued, her voice returning to its usual efficiency. "It might take a bit. I'll buzz you when I have them. As always, do what you need to resupply," Nolan replied, his voice low and cautious. "But, Elara, please be careful. This area of space suffers from severe scarcity. I don't want you battling with local authorities." He spotted a group of vaguely human-looking aliens walking up a street. "Better to keep a low profile if you can," he added, his eyes tracking the group's movement. Nolan made his way up the street, his steps quickening as he caught up with the humanoids he had noticed earlier. The crowd parted around him, some giving him curious glances, others hurriedly averting their eyes. "Excuse me." He approached the group from behind, his voice raised to be heard over the constant murmur of the crowd. "Hello? Hello, I was wondering if I could talk to you for a moment. Have you seen any others like me? I'm looking for my—" Abruptly, one member of the group whirled around, a weapon materializing in its hand. Without warning, it fired, the energy blast sizzling past Nolan's ear. Nolan dove to the side of the street, his body reacting on instinct as he rolled against a building, the rough surface scraping his skin. The alien gave him an angry look and continued walking with his group. "Damn, tough crowd," Nolan muttered, wincing as he got up and dusted himself off. The acrid smell of ozone from the weapon's discharge lingered in the air. Every eye on the street was looking at him. So much for a low profile, he thought. Forcing a smile, he waved at the onlookers apologetically. "Everything's fine, folks," he called out. "Nothing to see here." In his quick reaction, Nolan had dropped his refugee clothes. He watched helplessly as they were snatched up and carried away by opportunistic hands, disappearing into the crowd in mere seconds. Fortunately, he still had his 2 ration chips. Clutching them tightly in his fist, he headed up a broader street where there were fewer people, eventually making his way into a large open city square where an outdoor market had been set up. The market was a riot of colors, smells, and sounds. Makeshift stalls lined the perimeter, their wares a hodgepodge of scavenged tech, alien foodstuffs, and items Nolan couldn't begin to identify. The air was thick with the mingled aromas of exotic spices and less pleasant odors, while the constant hum of haggling in a dozen different languages created a disorienting backdrop. Nolan cautiously made his way through the alien marketplace, his eyes darting from stall to stall, observing the diverse species around him. He was so focused on taking in his surroundings that he almost didn't notice when a woman approached him, her movements fluid and purposeful. Without warning, she grabbed his elbow, her grip surprisingly strong. Nolan tensed, ready to defend himself, but the woman's next word stopped him cold. "Listen," she hissed, her voice barely audible above the market's din. "I know where your people are. They have a conclave not far from here." She looked up at him from under her hood, her large, gold-colored eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "I can show you." Nolan looked down into the strange alien's face, his mind grinding. Every instinct told him this was too good to be true, but the promise of finding other humans was too tempting to ignore. "By all means, lead the way," he replied, his tone carefully neutral. He knew it wasn't going to be that simple. On a starving planet, everything was transactional. You'd seen it dozens of times. "It will cost you," she said, her luminous eyes narrowing slightly. 10 ration chips. I'll take you there." "I just got here," Nolan replied, playing along with the game. "They only gave me 2 ration chips when I came in through receiving." "I know where we can get plenty more chips," she responded, her voice taking on an eager edge. "Are you armed? We can get as many as you like." The intensity of her eyes grew brighter, almost hypnotic in their glow. "If you help me get those chips, I'll help you find your people." Again, Nolan could smell the scam from miles away. He'd seen this play out countless times before. She'd lead him into a dead-end alley or an empty building. Her friends would bash his head in and take his 2 sad little ration chips, all in a day's work at the refugee camp. Still, he decided to play along, curious to see where this would lead. Perhaps he could turn the tables on his would-be attackers and gain some useful information in the process. "All right," Nolan said, feigning eagerness. "Lead the way. Let's get those chips." The woman's lips curled into a predatory smile, her golden eyes glinting with triumph. She tugged on Nolan's arm, guiding him away from the bustling market and into the labyrinthine streets beyond. As they moved deeper into the maze of alleys, the sounds of the market faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Nolan's senses were on high alert, his muscles tense and ready for action. He knew he was walking into a trap, but he was determined to come out on top. The narrow streets of the alien city twisted and turned, a labyrinth of desperation and survival. Nolan followed the hooded woman, his senses on high alert. The dilapidated building she led him to loomed before them, its entrance a maw of darkness that seemed to swallow what little light filtered down from the overcast sky. "Just inside," she whispered, her golden eyes glowing with an intensity that sent a shiver down Nolan's spine. As they crossed the threshold, Nolan's instincts screamed danger. The musty air inside was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something alien and vaguely threatening. His muscles tensed, ready for action. The woman turned, her mouth opening in an impossibly wide grin that revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. Before Nolan could react, a sound like 1,000 angry locusts erupted from her throat, the frequency drilling into his skull with excruciating precision. His vision blurred, his knees buckled, and the world faded to black. Consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by a dull throbbing in his head that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. Through bleary eyes, Nolan saw the woman rifling through his pockets, her slender fingers closing around his ration chips and comm badge. She turned to leave, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. The smile vanished as a massive, scaled fist connected with her skull. The sickening crunch of her chitin exoskeleton giving way echoed through the room. Brightly colored yellow blood spattered in all directions, painting the grimy walls with alien gore. The woman crumpled, her body a broken heap on the floor, golden eyes dimmed forever. Plex stood over her, his reptilian features set in a grim mask. Without a word, he grabbed Nolan's collar and roughly dragged him into a shadowy corner, his claws leaving shallow scratches on Nolan's skin. "Rest," the alien rumbled, his gravelly voice barely above a whisper. Time passed in a haze until Nolan's head finally cleared. The room came into focus, revealing a dingy space filled with broken furniture and years of accumulated grime. Plex sat nearby, his bulky form a silent sentinel in the gloom. "You save us," Plex said, his gravelly voice low and tinged with what might have been respect. "We save you." He extended the scaled hand, Nolan's comm badge and ration chips resting in his palm. Nolan accepted the badge, feeling its familiar weight in his hand, but left the chips. "Keep them," he said, his voice hoarse from the alien's sonic attack. "And thank you." Plex nodded, a flicker of understanding passing between them. In this harsh reality, debts paid and lives saved were the closest thing to friendship. As they left the building, stepping over the woman's body without a second glance, Nolan realized how far he'd come from the world he once knew. The journey back to humanity, it seemed, would take him through the darkest corners of the galaxy. After catching a few hours of fitful sleep in the wee hours of the morning, Nolan rolled his tired body from the corner of the fire escape he'd managed to secure. The cool, damp wind had howled around him all night, its mournful song a fitting backdrop to the desperation that permeated this place. But he'd made it through without getting his throat cut, which counted as a victory in this unforgiving world. As he shook off the sleep, he decided his best course of action was to find a spot on the edge of the market and simply observe the goings. And if there were humans here, he'd have to be patient and wait to spot them. His comm badge chirped, a welcome sound in the alien cacophony surrounding him. "Any luck, Elara?" he said in hushed tones, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings for any sign of threat. He felt a vibration in his pocket, and when he put his hand in, it was packed with ration chips. The cool, smooth surfaces of the chips were a stark contrast to the gritty reality around him. "I've managed to find some fuel, if you can call it that." Elara's voice came through, tinged with a hint of disdain. "It's barely more than scrapings from blown dilithium chambers, but it gives me enough to blink farther out and find cleaner stuff." "How are things on your side?" "It's ugly here," Nolan replied, his voice low and grim. "I've already been shot at and ambushed. Our friend Klex helped me out of a jam. Remind me not to get on his bad side." He sat in the shade, his back pressed against a crumbling wall as he watched the comings and goings at the market. "Can you discreetly beam down that mini blaster I got on? That planet with the blue light?" In an instant, he felt the reassuring weight of the weapon materialize inside his jacket. He slipped it into his right-hand jacket pocket, feeling a bit more secure. "Awesome. Look, you head out and get some clean fuel. I'll survive here for a couple days if needed." "All right, Nolan. I don't like it, but we do need fuel," Elara remarked, her tone carrying a mix of concern and resignation. "Do you want me to bring back the Havoc?" "I think she'll draw too much attention in this part of space. But if you want to put her in standby mode, that probably wouldn't be a bad idea." Nolan noticed some activity in the market. Two tall men in the same dark hoods worn by the woman he'd encountered the previous day. They were going through the crowd, asking if anyone had seen her. "How much notice will you need to get me out of here?" "Depends on how far away I am, and whether or not I've found fuel yet," Elara replied, her voice steady despite the potential danger. "Just keep hold of your badge, and I'll get you as soon as I can." "Okay, keep me posted," Nolan said, his voice tight as he watched the hooded figures draw nearer. "Looks like I need to be moving on." As the two tall, hooded men made their way closer, Nolan ducked into a stall at the market, keeping his head low. The pungent smell of alien spices filled his nostrils as he crouched behind a stack of crates. As he came out the back side of the stall, his heart nearly stopped. There, just on the other side of the next row of stores, he saw a sight he'd almost given up hope of ever seeing again. A human woman. "She's human," he breathed, the words escaping his lips before he could stop them. Without conscious thought, he began making his way around the long row of goods on display, his eyes never leaving the woman's form. As Nolan drew nearer, his heart pounding so loudly in his ears he could barely hear the market's din, the woman suddenly stopped. She turned, her eyes widening as they met his. In that split second of recognition, she bolted, disappearing into the crowd. Without hesitation, Nolan launched into a full sprint, his legs pumping as he navigated through the throng of aliens. The chase was on. His first glimpse of humanity in centuries slipping away before his eyes. "Wait!" stopped that man. The shout came from behind, the voice of one of the golden-eyed hooded men cutting through the noise. "Grab him." Nolan stayed focused on the dark-haired woman zigzagging her way through the market, her form occasionally visible between the stalls and alien bodies. He ran straight down the aisle, knocking over displays and sending wares clattering to the ground in his wake. As he rounded a corner, another hooded figure stepped out in front of him. Without breaking stride, Nolan put a meaty fist in the man's face. Yellow, gooey blood flew everywhere as the attacker snapped back, the satisfying sound of his skull connecting with the pavers. When Nolan looked up, the woman was out of sight. Panic gripped him for a moment before he caught a glimpse of her again, exiting the market and running into the streets. His lungs burning, muscles screaming in protest, he pushed on. Reaching into his pocket, Nolan grabbed a handful of chips. With a sharp motion, he flung them into the air behind him. The effect was instantaneous. Chaos erupted as crowds of desperate refugees swarmed the area, effectively blocking his pursuers. His breath coming in ragged gasps, Nolan followed the woman into the street and around a corner, just catching a glimpse as she made it around the next bend. He plowed forward, his vision tunneling as he focused solely on keeping her in sight. Suddenly, the world spun. Nolan felt a sharp pain in his shoulder and found himself face down on the rough pavement, a boot pressing into his neck with crushing force. His right arm was twisted behind him at an unnatural angle, the pain sharp and immediate, reminding him of his first and last wrestling practice as a freshman in high school. The woman's voice came from above him, cold and precise. "Humans are not appreciated much by the locals. That stunt in the marketplace is a good way to get us both killed." The pressure on his neck increased slightly. "Now, what do you want?" Nolan struggled to draw breath, the weight on his neck making speech difficult. "I have come to find you. I'm here to find you," he managed to grunt out, his voice strained and desperate. "I'm human." "I know you're human, you idiot," she replied, her tone dripping with exasperation. The pressure on Nolan's mostly numb arm eased slightly as she reached into his pocket, retrieving his mini blaster. "Is this for me?" "I'm not your enemy," Nolan gasped as she released his arm and stepped back. He sat up slowly, wincing at the pain that shot through his shoulder, and turned to face her. His eyes widened as he took in her appearance, unmistakably human, yet hardened by whatever circumstances had brought her to this forsaken place. Strong and ever defiant, Laan Noonien Singh covers Nolan with both her phase pistol and his mini blaster. "Who sent you?" "You said you're here to find me. Who sent you?" "Who knows that I'm here?" she repeated sharply. "You misunderstand," Nolan replied, his voice rough as he massaged his sore throat. He squinted up at her, the harsh alien sun behind her casting her face in shadow. "I'm here to find humanity had been lost. I'm here to find Earth, to find humans." He paused, the weight of his journey hanging heavy in the air between them. "I'm trying to get home, lady." A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps even a hint of sympathy, crossed the woman's face before her stern expression reasserted itself. "We need to move," she snapped, her eyes darting around the deserted alley. "Get up." She motioned to the right with a sharp jerk of her head, keeping the phaser close to her body to avoid drawing attention. "This way. Move." She directed Nolan through a maze of narrow streets and winding alleys, her movements precise and practiced. The sounds of the marketplace faded behind them, replaced by an eerie quiet broken only by their footsteps and ragged breathing. "In here, quickly," she barked, pushing Nolan toward the back door of a burned-out store. She cast one last wary glance over her shoulder before following him inside, pushing the door shut and sliding a crate full of debris in front of it. The transition from the bright alien sun to the darkness of the store's back room was jarring. Nolan blinked rapidly, his eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. "Sit," she gestured to one side, her voice low but commanding. Nolan held out his hands, fumbling in the darkness until he found something solid. He lowered himself onto what felt like an old crate, wincing as his bruised muscles protested the movement. The woman sat adjacent to him, her outline barely visible in the dim light filtering through boarded-up windows. "Well, we might as well get on with it," she said, her voice carrying a mix of weariness and wariness. The phaser in her hand glinted dully as she shifted, a reminder of the precarious situation. "What's your story, refugee?" "I'm not a refugee," Nolan replied, leaning back against the wall and feeling every one of his many years. "A Borg data module led me here. It's taken a very long time." The woman's posture stiffened at the mention of the Borg, her grip on the phaser tightening visibly. "And how did you get your hands on an actual Borg data module?" she demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Wait, where were you coming from?" She shook her head, as if to clear it. "Just start at the beginning. I want to know everything." She lifted the phaser again, its presence a silent threat. Nolan noticed the fatigue in her movements, the slight tremor in her hand as she held the weapon. Despite her bravado, it was clear she was nearing the end of her endurance. "Honestly, that would take at least all night, and I don't see you staying awake that long," he said, his voice softening slightly. Now adjusted to the light, Nolan moved to an old stuffed chair next to the crate he'd been perched on. He sank into it with a barely suppressed groan, feeling the ache of pursuit in every muscle. "I came from what people in this region call the Delta Quadrant, though I've heard it called by many different names," he began, watching as the woman's eyelids grew heavy despite her obvious efforts to stay alert. "I woke on a ship a long time ago, and I've been trying to get home to Earth ever since." As Nolan continued his impossible tale, he noticed her slipping away, her body relaxing incrementally as exhaustion finally overtook her. The sky outside had darkened, the alien world's night cycle beginning. Nolan's voice grew softer, his story becoming a soothing murmur in the quiet room. When he was certain she was asleep, Nolan carefully removed his jacket and draped it over her, mindful not to startle her awake. He found a comparatively clean spot on the floor, lowered himself down with a quiet groan, and closed his eyes. Despite the hard surface and the lingering tension, he soon fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, his body finally surrendering to the exhaustion of the past few days. Early the next morning, pale light streamed in from above, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. Nolan was curled up in a ball, dead to the world on the concrete floor. His body bore the evidence of his recent ordeals, bruises blossoming on exposed skin, dirt and grime caking his clothes. La'an was still in her chair, her grip on the phase pistol loosened, but not entirely relaxed, even in sleep. Her chest rose and fell with long, deep breaths, her face for once free of the wariness that had marked it when awake. Nolan was awakened by his comm badge chirping, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. His eyes still closed, he croaked out a response, "Go ahead." He tried to blink his eyes open, the crust of sleep making it a struggle, as he stretched awkwardly on the hard floor. The sound of his bones popping and tendons stretching filled the air. The sun was coming in through a second-story window, its rays just now making their way along the wall to shine on La'an. Nolan let himself get lost in the sight of her. Even filthy, with her hair in tight braids and exhaustion evident on her face, there was something undeniably captivating about her. She was the first human he'd seen in centuries, and the significance of that moment wasn't lost on him. "We're fueled up, Nolan." Elara's voice came through the comm, startling La'an awake. She jerked upright, pointing her phaser at Nolan and scanning the room with wild eyes, her instincts kicking in before her mind had fully awakened. "Have you had any luck finding your people?" "Who is that?" La'an demanded, her voice hoarse from sleep but no less commanding. "I'm looking at one right now," Nolan said with a smile, his eyes meeting La'an's. Despite the weapon pointed at him, there was a warmth in his gaze. "She's still deciding on whether or not I get to live until lunchtime." He begrudgingly pushed himself up with a groan, leaning over to let his stiff, sore body crumple into the stuffed chair. "Protocol 1, Elara asked, using their secret code word for kill everyone but me. "No, no, no," Nolan replied quickly, holding up an index finger to Lan in a placating gesture. "She seems harmless enough. You're ready to move if we need to." "You have a ship?" La'an's voice rose in pitch, a mix of surprise and anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" she shouted, her fatigue forgotten in the face of this new revelation. Suddenly, a commotion erupted outside. The sound of heavy footsteps and angry voices filtered through the thin walls. "Hey, who's in there? Open up." They began throwing shoulders and boots into the back door of the old store, the wood creaking ominously. They could hear more people gathering, ready to force their way in. "Protocol 2, Nolan said quickly, locking eyes with La'an. Before she could react, they both disappeared in swirling silver light, rematerializing in the transporter room of the Lost. La'an's hands immediately went to her hips, her eyes widening as she realized her weapons were missing. Panic flashed across her face as she patted her pockets frantically. "Calm down, for fuck's sake," Nolan grumbled, his patience wearing thin. He was in no mood for the usual bantering and picking at each other that always seemed to happen when you meet someone new. The events of the past few days had left him physically and emotionally drained. "Welcome to the Lost," he said, his voice softening slightly as he took in Lan's bewildered expression. He extended his hand, a gesture of peace. "My name is Nolan Mercer." La'an hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar surroundings before finally settling on Nolan's outstretched hand. With a resigned sigh, she accepted the handshake, her grip firm despite her obvious unease. "I'm Lan Noonian Singh, Chief of Security on the USS Enterprise," she said, her voice carrying a mix of wariness and professional pride. "What is this ship?" she added, her gaze sweeping across the transporter room, taking in technology that was clearly alien to anything she was familiar with. "The Lost is a ship I found. Long story," Nolan replied, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He moved to a nearby console, his fingers dancing across the controls with practiced ease. "But this log entry is what led me to the Borg." He tapped the screen, and suddenly the air was filled with a flickering holographic image. The almost 60-year-old captain's log began playing, the desperation in the alien captain's voice palpable even after all this time. "To anyone watching, please, my people are starving. We have arrived on a planet with few resources. Our ships were destroyed. We need help. Our coordinates are shown on the console to the left of this screen. The familiar face of a male alien, haggard and reaching with his last shred of hope, filled the air between them. La'an watched the message, her brow furrowed in concentration. As it ended, she turned back to Nolan, her professional demeanor reasserting itself. "And what is the USS Enterprise?" he asked, turning the tables on her. "Are you serious?" La'an's eyes widened in disbelief, her tone a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "The Enterprise is Starfleet's flagship," she paused, waiting for a flicker of recognition that never came. "I was on a mission to uncover a group that has been using Borg technology to attack Starfleet outposts." Again, she looked at Nolan expectantly, searching for any sign of comprehension. Nolan's blank expression seemed to unsettle her further. He gestured for her to follow as they headed up the ramp to the bridge, his voice casual as he asked, "Starfleet's your military? For the whole planet or just some of the countries?" As they entered the bridge, Nolan pulled up a holographic display, the stars of unfamiliar sectors swirling around them. Lan's eyes darted from console to console, clearly trying to make sense of the unusual technology surrounding her. "Earth is governed by the United Earth Government," La'an began, her voice taking on a lecturing tone tinged with exasperation. Earth officially became a founding member of the United Federation of Planets in 261, after the Romulan War. You really don't know any of this. They teach it in kindergarten. She paused, then added with a touch of sarcasm, "For fuck's sake, touché." Nolan chuckled, impressed by her quick comeback. "I was almost 200 when you joined your bunch of planets thing." He leaned against a console, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp as he studied La'an. "So is your mission complete? Or was it stalled by getting stuck on that craptastic planet?" Nolan asked, deciding this approach might be best to keep the conversation moving in the here and now. He knew from experience that military types tended to think mission first. La'an's demeanor shifted, her focus snapping back to her duties. "I have valuable information that I need to get back to Enterprise. There's a criminal organization out here we need to address. I had all the details 6 months ago, but that might all be useless now." She looked around the bridge, her eyes lingering on the advanced displays. "Is this ship warp-capable? Can you get me to Outpost 87 so I can send an encoded message?" "If you've got coordinates, we can get you there," Nolan replied, a hint of amusement in his voice as he glanced upward. "Here," La'an said, leaning past him to access the console. Though she couldn't recognize most of what was on the ship, she had learned how to find weapons, propulsion, and navigation systems on almost any vessel. Her fingers flew over the unfamiliar controls as she input the coordinates for Outpost 87. "There you go, your next stepping stone to Earth," she said, a note of challenge in her voice. "Can this ship get us there?" "Nolan, did you want me to get the Havoc?" Elara's disembodied voice filled the bridge, causing La'an to start slightly. "It's safe in that nebula. There are no ships within a light year of where it's located." A star chart appeared on the view screen, showing the Havoc's position. "I can have us at Chief Lon's coordinates in a minute." "Let's go," Nolan said, his tone casual but his eyes alert, watching La'an closely. He realized, perhaps a moment too late, that La'an might have a hard time with the blink drive side effects. The stars on the view screen elongated, then snapped back into shape, a small space station, more like a pod, appearing in the distance. Nolan stepped closer to La'an, ready to catch her if she were to fall. She shot him a warning look, and he stepped back, still watching warily to see if she'd drop like a stone. To his surprise, La'an had no physical reaction at all to the blink. Her eyes widened as she took in their new surroundings, then narrowed as she turned back to Nolan. "We were a 2-day haul at Warp 7 from there. Here." "How?" She trailed off, studying Nolan's face intently. "You did travel a long way, didn't you?" La'an's fingers flew over the unfamiliar console, her brow furrowed in concentration. The Bridge of the Lost hummed with energy. The advanced technology, a stark contrast to the primitive conditions they'd left behind on Vexora Prime. "I need to access the outpost's communication array," she muttered, more to herself than to Nolan. "Elara, can you establish a secure link with Outpost 87? Nolan asked, his eyes never leaving La'an's face, watching for any sign of deception or ulterior motives. "Connection established." Elara's disembodied voice replied, smooth and efficient. "Channel open." La'an leaned forward, her posture straightening as she slipped into her role as a Starfleet officer. Her voice was crisp and authoritative as she spoke. "This is Lieutenant La'an Noonien Singh, security clearance, Alpha Tango 937. Requesting secure channel to USS Enterprise." Seconds ticked by, filled only by the soft hum of the Lost's systems. The tension on the bridge was palpable, both Nolan and La'an holding their breath as they waited for a response. Finally, a voice crackled through, tinged with static. "Lieutenant Noonien Singh, this is Outpost 87. We're unable to establish a secure link to Enterprise. Their last check-in was 3 weeks ago. Current status and location unknown." La'an's face hardened, her jaw clenching visibly as she processed the news. She turned to Nolan, her eyes blazing with a mix of worry and determination. "We need to find them. Now." Nolan nodded, understanding the urgency in her voice. He'd seen that look before, the fierce loyalty of a crew member desperate to reunite with their ship, their family. Elara, pull up the Enterprise's last known coordinates. A star chart materialized on the view screen, a blinking dot indicating the Enterprise's last reported position. The vastness of space depicted on the screen seemed to emphasize the daunting task ahead of them. "That's deep in unclaimed space," La'an said, her voice tight with concern. Her eyes scanned the unfamiliar sectors surrounding the Enterprise's last known location. They must have been following a lead on the board tech. Nolan studied the map, his mind already calculating risks and possibilities. The corners of his mouth turned down slightly as he considered their options. It's not exactly a short trip, even with the blink drive. We'd be going in blind, potentially into hostile territory. La'an's gaze locked onto Nolan's, her voice steely with resolve. "My crew is out there, possibly in danger. I need to find them, with or without your help." For a moment, Nolan was quiet, weighing the dangers against the potential rewards. The prospect of venturing into unknown space was both thrilling and terrifying. Finally, he gave a short nod. "Elara, we have the database." "Nolan, I have everything," Elara's voice responded, a note of excitement barely concealed. "I have Earth's coordinates." Nolan seemed to freeze for a second, the weight of that statement hitting him like a physical blow. He tried to shake it off, but felt his eyes welling up, turning back to La'an. "All right, we'll find your ship," Elara called the Havoc. "I'm done tippy-toeing around. Plot a hop-skip course to the Enterprise's last known coordinates. We'll make a series of short jumps to avoid detection." As the Lost prepared to jump, La'an's hand brushed against her empty holster, a reminder of her vulnerable position. Her voice carried a hint of wry humor as she asked, "I don't suppose I could have my weapon back?" Nolan's lips quirked in a half-smile, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Let's see how this rescue mission goes first, shall we?" The stars on the view screen elongated once more as the Lost blinked into the belly of the Havoc, safely out of sensor range of Outpost 87. As they prepared for their journey into the unknown, both Nolan and La'an felt the weight of the task ahead and the potential consequences of their actions. The Havoc blinked into existence amidst chaos. The view screen erupted with flashes of weapons fire and the twisted dance of ships locked in mortal combat. The bridge of the massive vessel thrummed with energy, the advanced systems responding instantly to the unfolding battle before them. La'an's eyes widened, her body tensing as she recognized the familiar silhouette of the Enterprise, battered and venting plasma. Her voice rang out, sharp with urgency and a hint of fear for her crewmates. "Those are Gorn ships. Target the smaller vessels." Nolan didn't hesitate, his fingers flying over the controls as he called out, "Elara, you heard the lady. Light 'em up." The Havoc's weapons systems roared to life, lancing out with a precision that belied their devastating power. 6 Gorn ships erupted into short-lived stars, their destruction silent in the vacuum of space, but brilliant on the view screen. The remaining Gorn vessels, clearly outmatched by the Havoc's superior firepower, turned tail and fled, leaving the Enterprise alone in the vastness. "Elara, status of the Enterprise?" Nolan asked, his eyes fixed on the wounded Starfleet vessel, assessing the damage with a practiced eye. Multiple hull breaches, significant damage to warp and impulse engines. "Life support stable but taxed," Elara reported clinically, her voice calm amid the tension on the bridge. La'an was already moving towards the transporter pad, her posture rigid with determination. "We need to get over there." "Now." Nolan nodded, joining her on the pad. His voice was steady as he gave the command, "Elara, 2, to beam directly to the Enterprise bridge." They materialized in a scene of controlled chaos. Smoke hung in the air, acrid and thick, stinging their eyes and throats. Sparks erupted from damaged consoles as the crew worked feverishly to stabilize their ship. Captain Pike turned at their arrival, his face a mask of surprise and relief. "La'an, where have you?" He started toward her, before his training took over and his expression shifted to one of professional focus. "Report." As La'an quickly briefed her captain, her words clipped and efficient, Nolan took in the bridge. His eyes darted from station to station, noting the determination etched on every face. These people, he realized, were completely committed to their mission, which right now also meant survival. In all of it, Nolan marveled at the human forms around him. Their faces were beautiful in their diversity, their movements like a coordinated dance, even in crisis. The stress in their voices was like a song to his ears after so long among alien races. It felt like the last 60 years had been a bad cartoon, and now he was surrounded by real, living, breathing humans. Pike turned to Nolan, his piercing gaze evaluating the newcomer. His voice carried authority, tempered with gratitude as he spoke. "Seems we owe you our thanks, mister." Nolan took a second to snap out of his reverie, extending his hand as he replied, "Mercer. Nolan Mercer, sir. Pleased to meet you, Captain." His old Oklahoma drawl slipped out unconsciously. "Though I think you've got bigger problems right now." Pike nodded grimly, his eyes darting to a damage report scrolling across a nearby screen. "We're sitting ducks out here. Repairs will take weeks, and, if I may," Nolan interrupted, an idea forming. His voice took on a tone of confident assertion. "My ship, the Havoc, she's big enough to carry the Enterprise. We could get you somewhere safe, somewhere you can work on repairs without worrying about another attack." The bridge fell silent, all eyes turning to Pike. The captain's brow furrowed, weighing the offer against Starfleet protocols and his own instincts. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Pike finally nodded. "Mr. Mercer, I think we'll take you up on that offer." Nolan tapped his comm badge, his voice carrying a mix of authority and excitement. "Elara, do the calculations and blink the Havoc to surround the Enterprise. We're giving them a lift." In a matter of moments, the Enterprise found itself cradled in the massive hold of the Havoc. With a quick flash, they blinked across light years to a secure starbase. As the Federation crew marveled at the technology that had whisked them to safety, Nolan found himself drawn into a long conversation with La'an and Pike. In the captain's ready room, now powered by emergency systems, the air was thick with tension and the acrid smell of burned circuitry. Nolan sat across from Pike and Lan, the stark contrast between his weathered appearance and their crisp uniforms, a visual reminder of the vast distances both in space and time that separated their experiences. Nolan related his improbable tale, his voice low and measured. From his awakening, centuries in the future, to his long journey across the Delta Quadrant, he laid bare the story of the primitive passenger. La'an and Pike listened, their expressions a mix of disbelief and growing understanding. As Nolan's tale wound down, Elara's voice filled the room, sharing what she had gleaned from the Outpost 87 database. The Federation, it seemed, had grown far beyond what Nolan could have imagined. Hundreds of worlds, united in a common cause of exploration and mutual defense. "It's not perfect," La'an admitted, her voice carrying a hint of pride tinged with pragmatism. "But it's an idea worth fighting for." Nolan nodded, a complex mix of emotions playing across his face. His voice was thoughtful as he replied, "Sounds like you built something remarkable. I'm not sure where I fit into all this, but I'd like to get to Earth and find out." Pike smiled, extending his hand once more. The gesture was both formal and warmly human, bridging the gap between them. "Mr. Mercer, after what you've done for us today, I'd say you've already started to carve out your place. Whatever comes next, know that you've got friends in Starfleet." As Nolan prepared to return to the Havoc, La'an caught up with him in the corridor. The bustle of the crew working on repairs faded into the background as she approached. "Nolan," she said, her usual stern demeanor softened slightly. There was a hint of vulnerability in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for everything. And good luck finding your way home." Nolan smiled, a hint of his old roguish charm returning. His eyes crinkled at the corners as he replied, "Thanks, Lan. We're going there now." With a final nod to La'an, Nolan beamed back to the Havoc. As the massive ship prepared to depart, he gazed out at the stars, pondering the next leg of his journey. Earth was out there, waiting, and for the first time, it was within reach. The vastness of space stretched before him, no longer an insurmountable barrier but a path leading home. With a mixture of anticipation and trepidation, Nolan gave the command to set course for Earth. The Havoc's engines hummed to life, ready to carry him across the final stretch of his centuries-long odyssey. As the stars began to streak by, Nolan couldn't help but wonder what awaited him on the planet of his birth. Would it be the homecoming he had dreamed of for so long? Or would he find himself a stranger in a world that had moved on without him? Whatever the outcome, he knew that his journey was far from over. It was, in many ways, just beginning.